Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the 19th session of the AIM Prime program. Today's session is on business models, and our speaker for today is Dr. Srivardhini Jha. Srivardhini is Associate Professor in the Entrepreneurship area at Indian Institute of Management, Bangalore. Her research interest is in innovation and entrepreneurship in the emerging country context. Her specific research topics include organization and evolution of global R&D in multinational enterprises, innovation in Indian startups, organizing for corporate entrepreneurship, and social enterprise scaling. She has published papers in several peer-reviewed international journals such as MIS Quarterly, MIT Sloan Management Review, Management International Review and Annals of the New York Academy of Sciences. She is also the co-editor of the book titled Shifting Orbits, Decoding the Trajectory of the Indian Startup Ecosystem. Srivardhini teaches MBA and PhD and executive education programs on entrepreneurship, corporate innovation, and strategic partnerships. A firm believer in experiential learning, she has developed simulations and in-class exercises to bring the theoretical concepts to life in the classroom. Srivardhini is a reviewer for several academic journals. She also regularly reviews for the Academy of Management and Strategic Management Society conferences. Recently, she was invited by the Department of Science and Technology to join the drafting committee of the National Science, Technology and Innovation Policy. She is also a core member of the IVIN Consortium, a joint effort of top IIMs and IITs. She holds a postdoc from McGill Center for the Convergence of Health and Economics, a PhD in Corporate Strategy and Policy from IIM Bangalore, an MS in Management Science and Engineering from Stanford University, and a BS in Information Science and Engineering from Bangalore University. Prior to entering academia, Srivardhini has held senior managerial positions at Microsoft, Sun Microsystems, and Infosys. So with this introduction, welcome Srivardhini to the session and requesting to begin your session.
Thank you, Mugdha, for that very detailed and elaborate introduction. We can keep it very informal, but thank you nevertheless for doing a very formal and detailed introduction. Now, may I request all of you to turn on your videos? If you have bandwidth issues and all, I would understand, but otherwise I think it's going to be a lot more interactive and classroom-like. If you could please turn on your videos. Great. Yeah, thank you. Okay, so today we are going to be talking about business models, and the session will be very interactive. I mean, I intend to sort of, it's not going to be a lecture. It's going to be very interactive throughout. And that's the reason I would like you all to keep your videos on. And it's sort of nice to put names and faces as we proceed through the session. Okay. All right. So let me bring up my PPT just a second. Are you able to see?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, so let's sort of quickly start up by asking you all what comes to mind when I say business models. And Anmol, if you could help me out here, let's sort of get that, the Mentimeter stuff up and running. Just type in 2 or 3 words that come to your mind when I say business model, or when you think of business models. Anmol, do I need to stop sharing for you to be able to do this?
No, I think so. I've pasted the link in the chat. So if everyone can just click on that link and enter in the 2-3 words that
Okay.
come to mind, then we can. Yeah.
Anmol, but you may need to share your screen, right? As the cloud develops. Hello, Anmol? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, why don't we start with that? We will start with the word cloud, put in a few. I mean, if you think of more than 2, 3, please feel free to put in more words. We'll get a nicer cloud. Okay. Okay, maybe another 10 seconds and then we can wrap this up. Okay, great. So we have, this is interesting, right? So what comes up on top, you see, obviously you have revenue generation, strategy, profit, right? And a lot of things to do with revenue generation, market analysis. I see sales, I see channels. Interesting. Okay, so great. So we will actually be diving deeper into business models today, and you'll find a lot of this sort of resonating, right? And where does this fit in the broader scheme of a business model, right? What role does revenue play? What is the role of profit, or what does strategy have to do with business model, right? So we'll talk about a lot of these things. Okay. Right. Okay, you can see my screen now, right?
Yeah.
So the agenda is as follows for today's session. The next couple of hours, we'll talk about what are business models, how are they related to firm strategy. Okay, that's sort of first, we'll get that off the table. And then we'll talk about what are the 3 value dimensions. What are the dimensions of a business model? What does it entail, right? How do you think about it? Because business model is a lot of things. So what could be an organizing framework for one to think about a business model, right? And how do you articulate a business model? So we will discuss one particular tool which is quite handy in articulating a business model, which is the business model canvas. Okay. And then we will talk about how are business models developed. What is this process? What is this journey of developing a business model? How does that look? Right. And we'll have lots of examples peppered through all of these discussions, right? And the examples will be from everyday life, from companies that you've all heard of, that are covered extensively in the business press. Of course, there'll also be several examples from specific to science and technology based ventures, deep tech ventures. So how are business models developed? And then what we will do is towards the end, we will have 2, 3 mini cases, right? I'll explain the case to you because it's a short session. So we don't have the luxury of reading up a longish case. So we will have mini cases, and we will as a group discuss the decision that's facing the founders and what you might do with it, all in the context of business models, of course. And I also would like to set aside maybe 10 minutes towards the end for Q&A, but of course throughout the session feel free to jump in, interrupt, ask questions, right? This is above and beyond all of that. If there are other things that are somewhat adjacent to what we have discussed, we can do that during the final Q&A session. Okay, so that's broadly the agenda. So let's start by asking, what is a business model? Right, a lot of things came out through the word cloud. It's strategy, profit, revenue model generation, right? So those were some of the things that really bubbled up, market segmentations and so on. So here are a few definitions. There are many definitions of business models. In fact, it's, I would say, a fairly abused term, okay, in the business world. Business model and strategy, these are, and innovation, these are fairly abused terms, okay? People sort of throw this everywhere. So it's nice to sort of put a boundary around it and say, what is a business model? So this is one definition, which is fairly popular, put forth by Tees. Business model is a conceptual model of the business. And what does that conceptual model comprise? It comprises the organizational and financial architecture, right? So there are two elements here. There's an organizational architecture, there's a financial architecture. Now, why this is important is, a lot of times when we talk about business models, it's conflated with just the revenue model, right? It's usually confused with, okay, how do we make money? How do we make revenues? How do we generate profits? Yes, that's an important part of the business model, but that's not all, okay? That's one part of it. That's the financial aspect. But there's also the organizational architecture, right? That is also an important part of the business model. Here is a very interesting way of saying what is a business model. As per Margareta, it's a story that explains why and how a business works, right? It's a story. I mean, does it make sense? Why should a customer, whether it is an individual or a business, why should a customer pay attention to you? Why should a customer pay attention to your company's product, right? What about it resonates with the customer? What about it makes sense to the customer? It's a story. What is your story? What is the story of your business, right? So it's a very sort of very qualitative and commonplace way of saying what a business model is, but very accurate capture of what it is. And finally, Osterwalder and Pigneur talk about it as, it describes the rationale of how a business creates, delivers, and captures value, right? So it's not just about value capture. Again, notice, value capture is the piece that gets the most attention. You know, how do you generate revenue? How do you generate profits? But before you can capture value, there are two other important things that need to happen, which is, how does it create value and how does it deliver value, right? So there are these sort of three aspects to it. Now, so this is a business model. We will dig deeper into it. Just hold this thought in the mind. So what we have said so far is, it's a broad architecture of how the organization works and how it generates revenues and profits. There's an organizational aspect to it. There is a financial aspect to it. And in terms of value, the same thing. You can think about it as, how does it create value, deliver value, and appropriate value, right? Capture value. So now the question is, what about strategy? Because often business model, strategy are uttered in the same breath. Are they the same? Are they different? Right? So strategy embodies a set of choices that the company makes vis-a-vis its competition, right? When we say, what is your strategy? What we are talking about is, how are you thinking about yourself and your products and your portfolio vis-a-vis the competition, right? It's always with respect to the competitors out there. Okay. Now, there could be many different dimensions on this, right? Strategy, if you might have heard of terms like, are you a cost leader? You know, are you doing something much more cheaply? Are you getting that same product that's out there, but are you getting it to the customer, you know, far more at a price point that is, let's say, 10x lower? Are you a cost leader? Are you a differentiator? What does that mean? Are you a differentiator? Meaning, are you doing something in a very superior manner? Is your quality, let's say, 10x better? Is the ease of use 10x? Is the usability far superior, right? Are you differentiating yourself in some unique manner, right? And providing that product or service. And then the third aspect is it wide in scope, whether you're a differentiator or whether you're a cost leader? What is the scope of your business? Are you very diversified? Are you into multiple products and services? Or are you in the niche product? Do you have one single product or service that you strive to do well on, right? So this is, we will not get into the strategic aspects here, but this is just to give you a very high level about what do we mean by strategic position. It's really about what the business want, which business they want to be in, single business, diversified, unrelated, diversified, and so on, and how to position, where to compete. It's all about competition. What do you do better than your competition, right? Now, given a strategic position, let's say you are a cost leader. The business model will provide you a blueprint to achieve that strategic position. It's like a map. Okay. I want to be a differentiator. I want to be a cost leader. How do I do that? How do I organize myself? How do I orient my organization in order to achieve that strategic position? So they are very related concepts, but they are not the same. Okay. Now, a certain strategy could be associated with multiple business models. Okay. And we will talk about that also a little bit. For example, you have your grocery, e-grocery. You're all familiar with e-grocery, right? You have Big Basket. Yeah. That's an e-grocer, leveraging internet and e-commerce to transact in groceries. Now, you may also have heard about grocers, right? They were also in the news. Now, they're both trying to do the same thing. They're head-on competitors. They're striving to give the customer groceries at the least possible cost, right? That's the strategic positioning. But they get to that point using very different business models. Big Basket, on the one hand, actually has its own premium brands. It has an inventory. It is an inventory heavy model. Okay. Whereas Grofers is a hyper local model. It's an asset light model, as we will call it, meaning they don't hold any inventory. They don't have a warehouse where they have, rice and dal and vegetables and fruits sitting around. They don't hold it anywhere. What they do is they have a network of local stores from which they source whatever you want and dynamically fulfill, right? Two different ways of accomplishing the same thing, two different business models, right? So how you're organized to achieve a certain outcome for the organization. So that's sort of the subtle difference. And you have other examples also. For instance, if you look at travel companies, right, you have Make My Trip, you have Expedia, where you go and you sort of click a button and you book an airline ticket. Okay. So this is straightforward. You click and, they show you, they have a network of airlines at the back end. They show you different pricing and so on. You pick up what you want. On the other hand, you have Priceline. Priceline is a company which works on a bidding model, right? So you go and say that I want to fly from Bangalore to Delhi, and I'm only going to pay 2,000 rupees. Now, then the company looks at who can fulfill that demand, right? So it's a different way. It's sort of, it's all inversely working in that case. So there are different business models, right? These are just a couple of examples. Okay, so let's move on. So we have now sort of looked at what is business model, how is it related to strategy? Just to quickly recap, strategy is your competitive positioning in the market vis-a-vis others. How do you stack up against others who are in the market? You could be a differentiator, you could be a cost leader, etc. But then how you achieve that position is what the business model is. It is a blueprint. It's a map to achieve your desired outcome and position. So now, what are the three pillars of a business model? Right? We briefly touched upon this when we talked about the definition itself. So you can think of business models as having three pillars, three key pillars. One is the value creation pillar. So the business model should talk about what is that important, and not just important, what is that pervasive customer problem. See, a problem may be important, but it may be important for a very small set of people, right? Then the opportunity for a business is sort of limited. Is it an important and pervasive problem or need that you're solving? So one thing that your business model should address is, what is that problem which is important, which is widespread, that the business is solving? Okay. And then the second part of that value creation is, yes, you are solving an important problem or a need, but are you doing it better than everybody else on some dimension, right? Why should the customer care about you and your product, right? What is it that you are doing better? How are you doing it better, right? Are you faster? Are you cheaper? Are you, much better in terms of quality? How do you stack up against the alternatives that are available in the market today, right? So these two questions sort of really are at the heart of value creation. Are you creating value? Are you creating value to a substantial market, right? In a substantial marketplace. So that's one pillar of your business model, right? The second is, your business model should talk about value delivery. What is that? It's simply asking, okay, what are those resources and capabilities that you possess that allows you to build that product or service? You're proposing to build some product or service, right, for a particular customer segment. But what makes you ready to actually deliver this to the market? Do you have the necessary resources and capabilities, right? And what are they? What are these resources and capabilities? That is on the product side, right? Can you actually build this product or service? The sort of other part of it, the companion to that, is to ask, what are the resources and capabilities of this business, of your venture, that allows you to deliver a great customer experience? You may have a product or a service, right? But can you delight the customer, right? How are you reaching the customer? How are you interfacing with the customer? How are you supporting the customer, right, on an ongoing basis? So value creation and value delivery are very closely linked. If you think about it, when is value created? One can actually argue that unless you can do an effective delivery, there is no value being created. Value is realized only when the customer sees it, right? So they are very, very sort of intricately linked, but it's useful to think of them as these three sort of pieces, right? So on the value delivery, there are two pieces, which is how do you create that product and how do you deliver it to the customer, right? Which is linked to the operations of your organization. Remember, we talked that business model is about organizational architecture, right? So this captures the organizational architecture in some way. And the final piece is value appropriation. This is what comes up all the time when we talk about business model. This is really about the money, the revenues and the profits, right? So what is the revenue model of the business? How are you going to generate revenue? How are you going to unlock this value, right? You're creating value for the customer. Now, if the customer sees value, they're delighted by the product, they want to use it. Can you turn that aspiration or that need, the solution that you provide, into revenues? Can you unlock that value? Can you appropriate the value, right? So what is the revenue model? There are multiple revenue models we'll discuss. And what about the cost? So you always have to look at both. On the one hand, you have the revenue model, but then you also ask yourself, okay, what are my cost items, right? What am I spending on? And this is, of course, differs. Every business is different. We will take some examples and we will look at it. So these are the three big pieces: value creation, value delivery, value appropriation, right? Which come together to build your business model, right? To sort of pull it all together. Now, how do you capture this, right? So let me introduce you to a very handy tool which can be used to capture your business model. It's called a business model canvas, okay? Now, remember we talked about value creation, value delivery, and value appropriation. Now, as you look at this canvas, what you will see is that each of those elements are actually captured here in combinations, right? So the way to look at this canvas is, think of it as having two parts to it, okay? On to your right, where you see customer relationship. So there is a market element and there is a product element or organizational element. So everything, if you were to sort of draw a line, vertical line right in the middle of this canvas, it'll run through your value proposition, correct? Everything to the right of the value proposition is market facing. Everything to the left of your value proposition is internal to the organization, right? How are you organizing yourself to deliver that value to the market? That's why the value proposition sits in the middle. Value proposition captures how you're going to organize yourself to deliver that value to your target customer segment. Okay, that's how the story flows. It's a story. And at the bottom, you have revenue and costs, right? So the revenue, again, is what you get from the market side, from the customers. The cost is what you incur within the organization, which is why it is aligned with the left side, which is the organizational side. So that's the broad map of a business model canvas. Now, if you look at it, you would start by thinking about who is your customer. Who is your customer and what is that value proposition that you're creating for that customer? And I understand you have had a detailed session on value proposition and how to build a value proposition. So we will not go into that. But you can straight away from your value proposition canvas, whatever it is that you derive, you plug that in here into that sort of middle box, right? The value proposition that captures that. And as you know, value proposition is intimately tied to the customer segment because the value that you're proposing is for that particular customer segment. And it changes. The moment you change the customer segment, the value proposition is going to be different. Okay. Now, this is the first question we talked about. Remember, when we talked about the three: value creation, value delivery, value appropriation, the value creation is roughly captured by these two boxes. Who is the customer? What's the value that I'm delivering, right? And in that, what is the value that I'm delivering, you will capture what is that problem that you are solving and how are you solving it in a way that is superior to all other options that are available, other alternatives that are available in the market, right? So that's value creation, as we talked about. Then you talk about value delivery, which is captured by, these three boxes, which is key activities, key resources, and key partners on the organizational side, right? So what are those activities that you need to undertake to deliver this value proposition to your customer? What are those key resources that you need to deliver this value proposition? Who are the partners that you need to have on board, that you need to work with to deliver this value proposition, right? So that's your organizational side of things, which is crucial to value delivery, right? Which is how are you organizing yourself to come good on the value proposition? And on the right side, again, part of value delivery is how are you reaching your customer, right? What kind of a relationship do you have with your customer? How are you reaching them? How are you interacting with them? How are you ensuring that, you are delighting your customers, right? So that's the other piece. So those boxes roughly, again, I keep emphasizing roughly because we are sort of artificially, breaking them down because it's helpful and it's easy to understand, but they are all interlinked. Please do remember that, right? So that's the value delivery piece. And then you have value appropriation. Now, having done this, having figured out your value proposition, having figured out your value delivery, then you ask yourself, okay, how do I appropriate this value? How do I generate revenue? And what are my costs? Okay. It all evolves together. It is not that you sort of go at it in that order, but roughly, yes. The first thing that you want to tackle is value creation, right? Who's the customer? What's the value proposition? That's the first piece. Then you kind of focus on, okay, what's the value delivery mechanism? And then how do I make money from this, right? Often what happens is, a lot of ventures tend to jump into the revenue model too prematurely. The revenue model will start to coalesce, will start to surface only when you have clarity on your value creation and value delivery. Okay, so it's sort of an evolving model, if you will. So this business model canvas, we will dig deeper into this, is a very useful tool to capture the state of your business at any point in time. What's your business model? You can sort of capture everything on this. And as it evolves, it's a dynamic tool which will evolve with the business. Okay. Now let's look at each of these boxes briefly. Yeah. So you start, like I said, with the customer segments, right? So for whom are we creating value? Who is the customer? And who are our most important customers? This is very important because you might say, the whole world is my customer. That's fine. Yes, you may have a mass market product, but who are your early adopters? Who is feeling the pain the most, right? Who is most unhappy with the alternatives that are available in the marketplace, right? So that is your early adopter. You want to hone in on your early adopters very quickly. While you may have a broad market, you do want to know who are your early adopters, right? So that's the first question you ask, right? And some examples, you may say, I have a mass market, but most likely you have a niche market. What is that niche, right? You might have a segmented market. For instance, let's say you are in the apparel business, right? In the fashion business, you might segment your market and say, okay, I have a certain, portfolio of products for people who are in the age group of 20 to 30, and something else for 30 to 45, and something for 45 plus. So you might segment the market and then create a business model for each. So remember, the moment you segment the market, everything changes. Your business model will change. Everything is anchored around your customer segment. Is there a question? I think somebody is not on mute. Can you please mute?
We can continue now. Sorry about that. Yeah, somebody went off mute, I think. Yeah. We can continue, Srivardhini.
Yeah. I think.
Sorry.
You can hear me, right?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. Yeah. So I was saying that the customer segment is the anchor. That's where it all starts. And the entire business model is aligned around that customer segment. Okay. Depending on who your target customer is, you will figure out what is the value proposition. Again, going back to the example from fashion, your value proposition to a 20-year-old is very different from what your value proposition would be to a 45-year-old. right? Even though the product broadly is fashion, let's say apparels and accessories, right? It will be different. And so will the activities that are needed, the partners that you will need to bring on board, the resources that you need. And also remember, how you reach those segments will also be different, right? How do you reach a 22-year-old customer versus how do you reach a 50-year-old customer in terms of channels? Probably very differently, right? You might reach a 22-year-old on Instagram via something else, right? One of these social media type of applications. But for a 50-year-old, maybe the channels are very different, right? So these are things, maybe Facebook, maybe something else, or maybe not even social media, some other way. So this is what you need to think through. So this is about customer segment. Now, having figured out your customer segment, you have to see what is your value proposition. So this is the second box that you sort of fill up. What value do we deliver to the customer? Which of the customer problems are we trying to solve? Now, here again, there is a trap. And this again may have been covered briefly. I will just repeat it. It's good to reinforce. There may be hundreds of customer problems. But what are those top 2-3 problems that you want to solve? I think it's important to lay that down, right? Problems or needs. What are those top 2 or 3? Often there is a tendency to say, we are going to solve so many different problems, right? Doesn't help to boil the ocean, because then your whole value proposition is going to be very diffused. You want it to be very sharp. You want it to resonate with that customer segment. So keep it very sharp. What are those problems that you're trying to solve? What are those top needs that you're trying to satisfy, right? And how are you doing that in a superior way? That's your value proposition, right? And some elements, you can think of this depending on the business, that contribute to your value proposition is newness, right? Something that is novel. There is some novelty to this, which may be appealing to this customer segment. Maybe performance, right? Something is faster. You can get your job done faster. Let's say you're building a resume building website. Get your CV done in, 3 minutes, right? It's a value proposition that you can get it done much faster. Whereas maybe your competitor has something on offer which will take 30 minutes. Another way to position that is customization. What is it? Can you tailor this to the needs of the customers? Can they tailor it to suit their specific needs and requirements? It could also be based on design, brand, cost, of course, is another one, convenience, usability. So these are all some parameters that you could think about. It varies from business to business, but these are some elements that go into your value proposition. Okay. Now, channels is through which channels do you want to reach the customer, right? This is again, depends. Sometimes you could use multiple channels as well. It's what we call, right? Omni-channel, etc. means that you're trying to reach customers through multiple channels. They're not mutually exclusive, but you want to think this through, right? Which is, how are we reaching the customers? Are all the different channels integrated? Let's say you have a channel where you're reaching the customers through telephone, right? You call people, right? You get these calls from banks and insurance companies and all, right? That's a channel. It's a direct channel where you're trying to place a call to the customer. For B2B business, you could have a direct sales force, right? It could be web-based also. Sometimes it's indirect through a partner, right? Through a wholesaler. So there are direct and indirect channels, but you want to figure out what are your channels. And this is something that grows over time. You may start with one channel, you may add other channels over a period of time to expand your business, to penetrate your market further, right? So this is it. And are the channels integrated, right? You want to make sure that you give customers a unified experience, right? Suppose you have an app, you have a website, you have to make sure that the customer experience doesn't suffer. Now, the channel could be used for many things, and especially for science-based ventures and so on, there could be a lot of time that needs to be spent around awareness and educating the customer, because something is very new, something is very unique and different. You need to educate and bring about awareness, right? So there is a whole purchase cycle that happens. There is awareness, then the customer will evaluate, then the purchase, then the delivery, and then the after sales. So when you think of how you're engaging with the customer, you want to think about these different stages, right? How am I doing? How am I building awareness? How am I helping my customers evaluate? What does that mean? Meaning, let's say benchmark studies or some way for them to compare you against alternatives available. Are you making that happen? Are you facilitating that? Right? Because the customer needs information at their fingertips. The easier you make it for them, the higher your chances of winning the customer over, right? So what are you doing to facilitate evaluation? Then, of course, purchase is straightforward. How do you ensure that a positive evaluation leads to a purchase? Subsequently, delivery, are you able to fulfill that purchase in a seamless manner? And after sales support, maintenance, and so on. So you want to think about all of these pieces, right? And how you are delivering on each of them. And relatedly, as you think about channels, think about customer relationships. What is the expectation from each of these customer segments? Let's talk about just one segment, any segment. What is the relationship? Is it more do it yourself? Like, everything is out there. The customer will, let's say, example piece of software, they download, they set it up, they use it. Is it DIY? Like it is for many apps, right? You don't actually interact with any company. You just download the app, right? Or do you want to provide support? Is it something that is more complex? What kind of support do you provide, right? Is it personal assistance? Do you actually have somebody going to the customer site physically to install this particular piece of product? Or is it more telephonic? Is it automated? Or is there a community that will help customers use the product? And these, again, are not mutually exclusive, right? You could have multiple ways of establishing customer relationships, right? Something, again, to think about. And you also want to think about how costly are each of these things. Everybody would want an intimate relationship with the customer, sort of a personal rapport with the customer, but it's expensive, right? So you will have to also sort of weigh that against, okay, what is it that, what is the revenue that I'm getting from this customer? What are my margins? And what can I actually afford to, what kind of a support can I afford to give this customer? What kind of a customer relationship makes sense, right? So all of these things need to go into that thought process. And again, we are sort of in that business model canvas, we are on the right side of that, right? We are covering off all the boxes that were on the right side, which is the market facing boxes, right? And we will get to the organizational piece later. Now, revenue streams. So what are the customers willing to pay? What are they willing to pay for, right? And you want to ask questions. How are they currently paying? How would they prefer to pay? And how much does each revenue stream contribute to the overall revenues, right? So these are some questions. A lot of them will evolve as the business develops. The first and foremost you want to ask is, how much are they willing to pay? What are they willing to pay for, right? Sometimes you may have a product and you may also have a service. Okay, this is quite common. Are customers willing to pay for the product? One-time sale. You sell the product, they buy the product, they pay whatever X amount, that's it, it's done. Many times that is not possible because the product is too expensive. There is hesitation, customers are not willing to pay. you'll have to think about different revenue models, right? Maybe you give away the product, but make money from services. Is that a possibility? Or do you want to go for a leasing or a renting type of model? That is another piece to think about, right? And also you want to ask, hold on, I'm having some tech issues here moving this. Okay. Subscription fees. This is again another possibility, especially for software, etc. Right? If you're giving out a piece of software, subscription is a great model, because what it does is it provides visibility to a business, right? If you have signed on a customer, you signed a contract, they've subscribed to your product or service for the next 1 year, you know, your revenue streams are set for that time frame, right? So that's a great way to do it. Or is your revenue stream from advertising? So these are all possibilities, okay? Now we come to the left side. The questions to ask here is, what key resources do our value proposition require? Remember, everything is anchored around your customer and the value you're trying to create for the customer. In order to deliver this value, what are the key resources we need to have in place? In order to create those channels, in order to reach those customers through all those channels that we talked about, what kind of resources do we need, right? For instance, let's say you want to reach the customer through the internet, through a website, you know, through an e-commerce website. Then you need to think about, okay, how do we make that happen? What resources do we need? Maybe we need a technical resource. We need technologists who can build a website who will make that happen, right? Customer relationships. What kind of resources do we need for the customer relationships that we envisage to have, right? Suppose you want to have telesales. You need people who can actually sit and call people, right? Or you need to actually outsource it to a telemarketing company. You don't have to do everything in-house, but you can also outsource it. And to realize those revenue streams, what are the resources that you need? Let's say it's a web-based thing, sale, you know, you need a payment gateway that you need to integrate. All of those things will come under key resources, right? And this can fall under several categories. And of course, you know, suppose it's a product, which it would be for many of your ventures, you know, you need a manufacturing capability, right? You need actually a production setup. So the resource categories can be physical, right? Equipment, manufacturing equipment, and so on. It could be intellectual property. You have a certain IP. And you need human, financial, right? All of these different types of resources would be required. Then moving on to key activities. What key activities do our value propositions? Again, the same thing, similar to resources. You ask yourself, for everything that we want to do to deliver this value proposition, to access these channels, to create these relationships, what activities do we need to undertake, right? Do we need to do R&D? Do we need to do just problem solving, you know, troubleshooting, network building, production? What are those key activities that we as an organization need to engage in? That's what this captures. And key partnerships. Again, very important, because partnerships are a very useful way of growing a startup. And especially science-based ventures, we will talk a little more about it as we go along. Partnership-based growth is a very important mode of growth. So who are our key partners? And partners could be anybody. They could be your suppliers. They could be your complementers, right? They could be people that you have outsourced something to. So there could be many different forms that they take, right? So types of partnerships, as it mentions here, buyer-supplier relationships, strategic alliances. Now, strategic alliances, again, is a broad umbrella term. It could be marketing alliances, distribution alliances, all kinds of R&D alliances. It could take on many different forms, okay? And joint ventures as well. That's also another possibility. So what are those key partnerships that we need? And finally, the cost structure, right? What are the most important costs inherent in our business model, right? What is it? Is it production cost, R&D? Is it hosting, technology, infrastructure, different cost heads, right? Material. So you want to put all of that in. You want to understand what resources are most expensive, what activities are, cost heavy, right? So you want to also think about, when you are costing it, are there economies of scale and scope? Let's say you're doing 2-3 things. Does the scale help you? Does it bring the cost structure down? Or let's say you have 2 lines of business. Can you share your HR cost? Can you share your CA cost? There are economies of scope that are possible, right? So this is broadly what, and cost structure, you can think of them as fixed and variable costs, but it fall under various different categories. So this is your business model canvas. Let me take a quick pause here and ask if any of you have any questions at this point. Is it clear?
Yeah, Srivardhini, there were a couple of questions, so maybe I'll pose them on behalf of. The first question is, in this business model canvas, should it be done? Should a different one be done for different customer segments? Because this is for the whole business as a whole, right? Or do you recommend that it should be combined eventually into one?
I think to start with, when you're in the infancy, you will typically start with one customer segment. I mean, you may have an aspiration of doing multiple customer segments over a period of time, but I would strongly recommend that, you hone in on an early adopter segment. You start with that early adopter segment where the problem is most acute, where the customers are unhappy with the alternatives available. So the short answer is yes. Even let us say you have multiple customer segments that you are looking at right from the get-go, it's best to have different business model canvas. It can be very different. Value proposition can be different, will be different, and everything associated will be different. The other way to do it, and it is up to you, is to color code it. Some companies like to just put it all into one business model canvas. So the way this canvas actually works, a lot of people, what they do is they print it up, right? Or they write it up on a big white board and they put sticky notes, right? Who's your customer? They sort of put sticky notes, or they write it in different colored pens. Of course, if you prefer the soft copy, you can do that. You can color code. Let's say you pick up one customer segment and all the associated, the value proposition, the activities, resources, partnerships for that particular customer segment would be color coded in that same color. And then you could have, that is one way to do it. But my suggestion would be to just keep it separate for at least initially, and then sort of take it along. See, what happens is you'll start with this canvas, and then this will become second nature to you. This is initially, this is just a framework for you to organize and think. And it makes sure that you are not leaving out any important element of your business model. You're taking everything into account. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's.
Yeah, I think that's also what SN had to say, which is that it's a good framework to start thinking and to strategize and so on and so forth. You might never actually be using it in its entirety in a presentation or whatever it is, but it gives you great clarity in terms of what you're doing as well, right?
Absolutely. And as you move towards, see, the other piece is when you're starting out a venture, when you're in the initial stages, if you sit and write a business plan, a business plan could take about a month or two to write, right? It's 30-40 page document. You'll write it up, and then 2 weeks later, it's obsolete. It's gone. It's different. It's changed. So it's really not worth spending so much time writing up a full-fledged business plan right from the get-go, because you are operating in the realm of uncertainty. So many things are evolving, changing. You don't know the market. In this case, even the technology has to be verified, validated, it has to mature and so on. So there's just so many moving pieces that if you put a business model, I mean, it's just a waste of time if you put down a very elaborate business model. So what these canvases do is they help you capture your business plan or your business model in a snapshot, in a very parsimonious manner. And then when you feel that you have reached a steady state, you're fairly stable, when you go pitch to a VC, etc., you will obviously have a more detailed business plan. And this business model canvas will feed that. It will be a good starting point to sort of, it'll help you create a robust business plan that checks all the boxes, right? That'll ensure that you have taken everything into account.
Yeah. So there's also another question about risk mitigation. The question is this is with reference to your 3 pillars. Risk mitigation is an important component of business model. Though we see it through the light of capital, still it is distinct. Could we put it as a 4th pillar?
So, okay, I think this was Vaibhav, right?
Yeah.
Okay, Vaibhav, elaborate a little bit. When you say risk mitigation, what do you have in mind?
Anmol, can you unmute?
Vaibhav, you can unmute.
Now I can.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Thank you. So my point here was, when we try to create a cost, when you're talking about the capital cost and everything, yes, risk mitigation is done in that sense. We are thinking in terms of the risk towards the investment, risk of loss of resources and everything. What is the probability we are reaching there could be measured in cost. But still, when you run Monte Carlo or you try to do certain calculations, you're not only thinking about money, you are thinking as a segregated, separate component. And if you have not done that, you will never be able to identify which channels to choose, which source of capital to choose. So that part I wanted to see from your thing, that whether it should be a 4th pillar, like it's,
Yeah, so I think there are a few ways of doing that. So, when you put numbers around revenues, right? Let's say you're anticipating a certain revenue. You always adjust it with risk, right? It's always risk adjusted. Or let's say you're doing scenario planning and you're saying there is a 0.5 probability that I'll make so much and a 0.5 probability that this particular scenario will play out. So you do a weighted average and you calculate your payback. So you can incorporate that into your model. But yes, I think to your point, the risk element has to be captured in a business plan, no doubt. But there is no way to capture it in a canvas. But is it important? Definitely it is, right? What I'm trying to say is, one way to capture it in this canvas, if you wish to, would be in that revenue box. Risk adjusted revenue.
Risk adjusted revenue.
You could do that.
Yes.
Srivardhini, you can also think of it as probably, if you look at the value, the slide which you had on the 3 pillars, risk could be an element of, depending upon how you define risk, an element on any of those 3 also, right? Of value creation or of value delivery or of value appropriation as well, right?
Right. I mean, it could, right? There is always a probability that things don't go per plan, right? It's an element. The risk element runs throughout. You're absolutely right. But if you were to capture it in one place, I would capture it in that revenue box, simply because it kind of it's like it captures the outcome of everything else, right? But yeah. You're right. You're right.
Yeah. So when you think through, I mean, this model, of course, the business canvas model is very useful for thinking through this. And thanks for putting down these examples, because they sort of give you a little more better feel for what is intended. Now, when people are thinking through their own businesses, it might help to sort of, can we just take I mean, if you have a few minutes, can we just take an example and just walk through it a little bit, if
I'll
possible.
do that. I'll
Yeah?
come to that. So this
Sure,
is
sure.
just the conceptual introduction of what are the different things.
Yeah.
Now, the business model canvas is available on the internet. I think it's also part of the resource library that Anmol and all have put together. So what I would suggest is you download that and at your own leisure, fill it out for your firm. We won't do that in this session right now. There's no time to do that. But what I'll do is, in the next segment, we will talk about an example, right? And we will look at how that business model evolved. So we will go through that. That will give you a sense of what is involved, right? It's not very detailed, but it will give you an idea.
Sure, that should be good. Yeah, let's continue. There aren't any further questions. Anybody else has any questions? Please type it in the chat box. Yeah.
Okay, I'll take it at the next thing. I'll move forward now. Okay, so now what makes a good business model, right? So we talked about all of this, all these different boxes, all these different elements. Don't think of them as just boxes, but they're just different elements that go into the model that will help you create, deliver, and appropriate value. So what makes a good business model? Obviously, one that has a compelling value proposition, right? This has been told to you many times. The second is one that is consistent with organizational strategy. Now, this is an important point. And what do we exactly mean by that? Now, I talked about organizational strategy and how, let's say you could be a cost leader or you could be a differentiator, right? Now, think of a boutique financial services firm, right? That provides investment advice to high net worth individuals, right? Let's say that's your business. Now, you're a differentiated company, right? So what is it that you need to do? So your organizational strategy, for instance, the way you reach out to the customer, the way you engage with that customer has to align with that strategy, right? So in this particular example, if you are a boutique investment firm targeting high net worth individuals, you will obviously have an on-field sales and marketing force, right? You will need to have a personal connect with those customers. You will need a personal rapport with those customers because they are going to entrust you with probably crores of rupees, right? And you are saying that you're going to give them a differentiated experience. So what I'm saying is each of these things, elements in the business model, should fold into your strategic position, right? For example, if you say I'm a differentiated player, and if you tell the customers do it yourself, go to the website, and that's discordant. Okay, so you have to have a model that is consistent with your organizational strategy. Suppose you're a low cost airline. You don't want to be giving, full meals and whatever else, and headphones and things like that, which is kind of what I'm talking about. So it happened that airlines have gone bust by pursuing models that were not in alignment with their strategy. It should also be internally consistent, like the different elements have to all fit, called the strategic fit. What does that mean? Again, let's look at some examples. Suppose you think of, have you heard of this company called Forest Essentials? Forest Essentials is a company that makes luxurious Ayurveda. Okay, Ayurvedic products, but high-end luxury. Like they'll have the small 20 ml product, which will cost you 1,000 rupees. Okay. And they were on TV, they had done TV advertising and marketing, where they had all these models who were showing how their products are very pure, they get it from the forest, etc., etc. Okay, that's their positioning. So it's a premium brand, highly differentiated product. Now, when you look at how they sort of, the other pieces of their business, right? So in order to build this brand, it's about brand building in this case, right? So they have these nice looking storefronts in high-end malls. So you go to a high-end mall like a Phoenix Market City, etc. you will find a Forest Essential store there. You will not find them in your other malls. You will find them only in the bigger malls, right? And what they also do is they have tied up with the Taj group of hotels. Again, premium brand, that association. So they only partner with high-end luxury brands because they are also trying to play in that category. So if you look at the activities, they're all internally consistent, right? So who you partner with, what kind of a store you put up, or whether you put up a store, right? What kind of celebrity endorsements you get, how you package the product, right? Premium packaging. So it's all, everything has to be internally consistent. And you can take this for any number of examples. You take a low-cost airline, right? Low-cost airline, standardized fleets, right? They'll have the same type of equipment. They'll not have multiple types of aircrafts. No food, right? Or buy your own food, or buy it inside the aircraft. They're focused on capacity utilization, quick turnaround. So it's all focused on lowering costs, right? Everything, every activity should contribute towards that positioning, and it is internally consistent, right? Same thing. So you can look at IT services companies and you'll find similar examples. And finally, your business model should pass the narrative test and the numbers test. So what is the narrative test? Narrative is, do you have a story? Do you have a story that's convincing, that can grab attention of your customers? Compelling story. But it's not enough to have a narrative alone. It should also pass the numbers test. So what does that mean? As an example, back in 2000, 2002, in the US, you had this company called Webvan, which unfortunately became the poster child of this dot-com bubble. Okay, it went down with the dot-com burst. So Webvan had a very nice narrative, right? It's similar to what our Big Basket and all these guys are doing today, but 20 years ago, grocery at your doorstep. So story was very compelling, but what failed was the numbers test. Why did it fail? Because they had all these huge infrastructure, completely automated warehouse and whatnot, and robots and this and that. It just didn't make sense in terms of numbers. The costs that they were incurring to deliver groceries, which is an extremely low margin product, just did not make sense, financial sense. The numbers did not add up. Okay, so the narrative was good, but the number test failed. So that's an example. Sometimes it could go the other way, right? You may have, it may not pass the narrative test at all. So example is, I think I mentioned this earlier, there's a company called Priceline, which again, it's a you can book airline tickets through Priceline, but their model is you bid for it, right? You name a price and we will match it. If we can match it, we'll match it. You say, I'll pay 2,000 rupees or 3,000 rupees for an airline ticket, we'll match it. Now, what they did, their airline thing worked well. They tried to extend that. They created something called Priceline Web House or something like that, which was basically, they tried to take that same bidding model to the grocery space, where customers would say, I'll pay $2 for a bottle of ketchup. And behind the scenes, they would try and figure out who is willing to, Kisan or Heinz or somebody else, who is willing to deliver that $2 ketchup bottle. Now, this did not pass the narrative test at all, because from the producer standpoint, they didn't want this, right? Think about it. If you don't book an airline ticket, if the seat is going empty, you are highly incentivized to, as a producer, you can't hold that inventory. You can't put it in inventory and say, okay, I'll sell it later. It's going to go empty, right? The plane takes off, that's it. You've lost the money. So it worked for that model, right? For airline and hotel and so on. But for groceries, it didn't work. For the supplier side, it didn't make sense. They said, you know what, I'm not going to do it. I'm going to sell this product later. It has a shelf life of 2 years. I'm fine. So it just didn't, the story did not click. So it could go both ways. So narrative test, numbers test, both need to happen. So this is something that you can do at your own leisure, pick up a canvas, populate it for your own venture. And this is, remember, it's an ongoing process. It evolves as your business evolves. Okay. Now, how do you arrive at a business model? I'll tell you a story. I'll take you through the story of Meesho. So Meesho is a company that recently became a unicorn. Okay. So they were in the news. They have raised, I think, recently some $200 million, etc. It's a social commerce company. So what did they do? Let's look at Meesho and their business model evolution, right? So if you look at the case of Meesho, what they first did was they said their whole idea was, they started in 2016, around thereabouts. They said hyperlocal is sort of the flavor of the season, right? Swiggy, Zomato, and all had already happened. Everything was hyperlocal. There was grocers. Now there is no hyperlocal for retail, right? So I want to go and buy, hankies from my local shop, right? Or some little thing from the local shop, retail shop. I'll have to go, I have to find parking, I have to do all this. Why should I do that? Why not create a platform for hyperlocal retail, right? So that was their idea. They started with that. So this is what it looked like, right? They came up with an application. It's actually a platform, right? They listed all the retailers in that neighborhood stores, all the neighborhood stores in a particular area. Customers would download the app, they would browse, they would say, okay. They would go through the listings, they would look at what each shop has, and they would request. The shopkeeper would send somebody, would send a sales boy to their home, the customer's home. They would try it on. If they like it, they pay for it, and the transaction is done. And Meesho would get a cut out of this transaction, right? So some 5% or 10%. So this was the model. Now, if you think, this is how the business model would have looked when it started, right? This is the first model of Meesho. Who is their customer segment? Their customer segment was young, middle-aged men and women. That was their customer segment. They were looking at people who are tech savvy, who could use an app and so on, right? That was on one side. Their value proposition: access all your neighborhood stores from the comfort of your home. You don't need to step out, you don't need to drive out, etc., etc. And the high level concept is Swiggy for fashion. So when you talk about a value proposition, you can give a parallel in terms of some other well-known business. It's a Swiggy for fashion, right? And how would you, so I've tried to fill out, this is not extensive. This is only meant to be an illustration on how you can sort of look at the business model. And more importantly, how it evolves, right? That's the focus. So their key resources: human resources, technical infrastructure. They had to develop a platform and so on. Revenue streams: commission on sales facilitated, cost structure involved, all of these different costs, right? Now what happened? It didn't take off. It was a spectacular failure, right? Initially, they gave some promotions. There were some sales. The moment the promotions went away, nobody bought anything. So they said, this is not working. So they did a pivot. What was their second iteration? They said, look, forget the end customer. We will help the retailers. Okay. So they created a product for the retailers, this neighborhood mom and pop stores that we talked about, right? So they had figured out that these guys were struggling to manage their business, etc. So they came up with a piece of software, which was an application again, that would help the retailers manage their customers. So Meesho was not interacting with the end users anymore. Their customer was the retailer themselves, right? Neighborhood stores. Give them a piece of software, help them manage their customers, help them manage their business. So this was the broad business model. And look at how the business canvas changed, right? Your customer segment changed. It was not young men and women 20 to 45-year-old anymore. The customer segment was the small retailers themselves, Okay. And what was the value proposition? Completely different. We will help you organize your business and increase your sales. That was the promise. How can you get organized? It was like an Indian version of Shopify. So along with this, everything changed, including their revenue model, right? They were going to license out the software. They were going to get that and probably charge an annual support and maintenance fee. So this was their second iteration. Okay. And this is how broadly the business model looked. Now, this was working fairly well, but not as well as they had hoped. Okay. Then they did a third pivot, which was basically they found that of all these small retailers that they were trying to help with a piece of software, they found that many of the retailers on their platform did not even have a storefront. When they looked at the data, they realized that these were actually virtual retailers. They were probably women sitting, mostly women, probably some men as well, sitting in their homes and running a boutique, virtual boutique, right? And they were trying to source material, salwars and saris and so on and so forth. And they were running a commerce without a storefront, just like that. And then they saw that this was an interesting problem to solve. So they made another pivot. And now their customers were a subset of the retailers. They were these little entrepreneurs, right? The women entrepreneurs who were running virtual boutiques. And what did they help them do? They helped them not manage their customers. They were doing that through WhatsApp, etc. They helped them manage their supply side. Right? How can we help them with a more streamlined supply side? So that was their next idea, right? And look at how the business model canvas changed. So the customer segment now becomes the micro entrepreneurs, which is a sub-segment of those retail shops, virtual boutiques. And the value proposition changed also. We will manage your suppliers so you can better serve your customers, right? So the whole idea was creating a platform between the suppliers and these retailers, the micro entrepreneur retailers, right? Very different from the previous one. And look at the key partners here. Suddenly the suppliers need to be brought on board. Logistics companies to deliver the products need to be brought on board. The activities changed, the resources changed, and again their revenue model changed, right? Again, it was now commission on sales facilitated. So this is an example for you, on how the business model canvas has changed, right? This is sort of an everyday example. Meesho is now a well-known company, but this is sort of their journey. This is how they went from, when they started and how they arrived. Any questions at this point? Is this clear?
Yeah. Any questions? Please type it on the chat box, please. Yeah, I think this was quite clear. Nice
Great.
example. Yeah.
Great.
I think
Let's
we should.
move forward.
Yeah, let's go ahead. Yeah.
So if you reflect on the Meesho's journey towards a business model, now I want to hear from all of you. Let's keep it interactive. And can I again request you all to turn on your videos if possible? It'll be nice to see some faces. Thank you. Please go ahead. Yeah, so just look at the journey. If you look at Meesho's journey, what strikes you? Just in terms of business model development, what strikes you?
Can I request
Anybody?
people to just put up their hands if possible? Then we can unmute them then.
Yeah, I think Kalpit is saying they knew when to pivot. Yeah, that's a good point. Try, test, and pivot, right? So that's sort of the process. You try something, you test out whether it's working, you pivot. Yeah, Sonali, go ahead.
Sonali, just unmute yourself.
So
Yeah,
when someone can understand that, okay, now I have to change my business model, what is the time point that people should think that, yes, I have to change my business model?
That's a great question. And There is no easy answer, right? See, what happens is when entrepreneurs are working on something, there is always there's the sunk cost fallacy, as we call it. So what that means is, now we have put all this time and effort into this particular business or trying to focus on this customer segment, building out a certain model. Now, you may be seeing evidence to the contrary. You may actually be seeing evidence saying this is not working, but you don't want to actually believe that, right? You are constantly, that's human nature actually. We are all very, very prone to what we call as confirmation bias, right? At any given point in time, you will have evidence that will tell you that this particular model is not working, but there may be some parts that are saying, yeah, it's working. Everything works in some pockets, right? So it is a very challenging situation because you should not fall into that confirmation bias. So, you have to evaluate the business somewhat dispassionately at some point. And it is not easy. It's more easily said than done. And most entrepreneurs that I have spoken to, what they share is that, yes, we pivoted, but we could have pivoted at least 3 months sooner. They say this after they have pivoted, right? I mean, at some level they knew, but they were also hopeful that something would click and fall into place. So it does happen. So the best way to do it, to your question, is to have metrics. When you create a model, what is it that you want to measure, right? What is it that will tell you that your business is on the right track? You set up those metrics before you roll out the business model, right? And hold yourself to those metrics, because that's the only objective way you can assess yourself and compare it, right? A lot of these things have benchmarks. I mean, of course, you will have to see what those are for your business. For example, if it's an app-based business like Meesho is, some of the metrics that you will look for is churn rate, right? How many people are uninstalling the app, right? How many people are coming back, repeat customers? So there are certain things, and there are certain benchmarks as well. So if your churn rate is more than 30%, then it's trouble, right? It's not going to be sustainable. So you'll have to, and these metrics will be different for every business, right? It's very specific to the type of business, but do take the time to put down those metrics, call them out and say, this is what I'm going to measure myself on, right? So that's how you can overcome some of this confirmation bias, but it's hard. It's hard for sure. I think we have one more hand up.
Yeah, we also see that with pivoting, they've also shortened their market segment, like from retailers from age 20 to 50, men and women. They came to a small subsegment, and mostly women, which is working well with them.
Yeah. So a lot of it is also driven by being in touch with the customer. So this was not a random pivot, right? They were very, very familiar with who their customers were. They were looking at the data constantly. As these people came on board, as they got retailers on board, they did a lot of analysis on who are these retailers, what is their problem. So one of the things that Meesho does really well is that customer connect, right? In fact, they have an internal sort of slogan in the company that says, connect or die, which means to say either you connect with your customers on an ongoing basis or be ready to go out of business. So that's the kind of urgency and importance they put on customer connect. And what both the founders say is that has helped them. And in fact, they encourage every single person in the company, not just the founders, their engineers, to go and talk to their customers. And that has helped them, right? And that has helped them in many ways. That has helped them improve their product. That has also helped them understand the customer need better. So it's all about going deeper and understanding the customer's life, their use case, what role this product plays in that customer journey, in that customer's life. It's important to understand that. It cannot be understood just merely by floating surveys, etc. the conversations are very important.
Yep. So I think there was a related question there of did they fail to understand the problem before starting, or do you think the market research survey would have helped them to start with iteration too?
Yeah, I think that is also a good question. Perhaps they jumped in too soon, right? But if you ask them, they said, well, at that time, everything was hyper local. There was a huge tailwinds for anything hyper local. They spoke to their VC friends. They said, yeah, hyper local in retail hasn't been done. And they said, we wouldn't change anything. Yeah, you're right. Maybe if they had done customer interviews, they did only talk to some of their friends and said, you know what, I don't like to shop, maybe I can do this and so on. But if they had done better customer interviews, maybe they could have avoided the first iteration. You are right. But they also say that given where they were coming at it from, and the other thing that they learned through this whole process, which is interesting, is they said, never ask VCs for advice, right? They said they don't know anything about the business. So don't ask VCs about your business. That is not they are not the go-to people. So they did make that mistake in the beginning, right? They went to their VC friends and asked, okay, should we do this? They are no experts. They said what they thought. It was yet another opinion. So later on, they said, yes, any day, customer over VC.
Yeah. And also, I think getting your hands dirty is also equally important, right? I mean, probably in hindsight, we can say that, but if they had not jumped in, probably they would have never discovered what that opportunity was, right?
Absolutely. I think, but they actually, to their credit, what they did well was they pivoted very rapidly. In about 6 months, they had moved on from the first model. So they didn't lose a whole lot of time.
Yeah. Another question, Jen, when the venture is a technology push kind of a venture rather than a market pull approach, can the business model approach remain the same?
Okay, Vikas, hold on to that question. We'll tackle that problem in the upcoming slide.
Can I take one last question before we continue?
Yeah.
Yeah. Should we get mentors from the start who can help with rigorous analysis of business model or regular basis, or should we focus on customer feedbacks in this journey?
It's not an either or. I think you can have mentors for sure, but there is no substitute for customer connect and feedback. No mentor can give you what a customer can give you. So definitely customer feedback, should drive the course of your business. Feel free to, of course, discuss it with the mentor. That is helpful. It's good to get an objective view, discuss with a mentor what you have learned from a customer, brainstorm, all of that is okay. But mentors cannot substitute for customers. Okay. So I have quite a bit more to go. How are we doing on time? We only have half an hour. So let's sort of...
yeah, let's go ahead.
So why is this? Now, what I think a lot of you did notice that this was a very iterative process, a trial and error process, right? That Misho went through. Now, why is this iterative process challenging for science-based ventures like yourselves, right? I mean, you all are running deep tech ventures. It's far more challenging in this space. Why is that? Just want to hear your thoughts. First of all, do you agree? And if so, why?
Yeah, on the chat box, please. We have an answer saying expenses.
That's a bit
more. Yeah.
Yeah.
Can expand that a little bit.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Yeah, less flexibility. Product development cycles are long.
Yeah. All right. Product development, higher capital.
Higher capital.
Yeah. Okay.
Research effort to start with required is quite high.
Yeah.
Deep techs requires a lot of effort to build something on which you can get customer feedback. So getting to customer feedback takes time. Defining sustainability is hard for product. It's not the approach, but the base technology needs to change, adapt.
Absolutely. Okay, so we'll sort of move ahead with that. So a lot of those are here. You have already covered that, right? So if you look at Meesho's example, their technology was fairly straightforward, right? I mean, this is all mostly off-the-shelf technology that you can quickly cobble together. You can get a platform up and running in a week's time, or a little more than that. So it's really not that complicated on the technology side, right? But when you're talking about science-based ventures, you need iterations on both ends, right? Not just on the market. Meesho had to iterate on the market side very rapidly, which they did well. But you also have to iterate on the technology side. You have to perfect the technology. So it kind of adds to that complexity. It makes it harder when it is a science-based venture. And as some of you pointed out, technology needs to be tailored for a specific market application, right? If you have a generic piece of technology that can have multiple applications, now you will still need to tailor it for that particular application. And that is actually, it's time taking and it's costly. So, pivoting in general is time taking and costly because you spend quite a lot of time, right? Actually developing that product for a particular market application, it might take you several months to years. And then if you have to pivot, it means you have lost all of those months and years, right? A great deal of it. So therefore it is costly, it's time taking. And of course, resources are scarce. This is true for any venture, definitely for science-based ventures as well. So there is a limit to how many pivots the firm can execute before you run out of money, right? Or you will need to keep raising money somehow to convince. So there's a chicken and egg. Unless you show market traction, it's difficult to raise more capital, right? And then if you're running out of capital without getting market traction, you can get into a sticky situation. This is true actually for every firm, but because the development cycles are long, I think it challenges science-based ventures to a greater extent because the number of pivots that you can do is somewhat limited. So what we will do now is, I had a breakout session, but in the interest of time, I'm going to skip through that. So the question to ask is, given what we know now, what is it that science-based ventures can do to limit the number of pivots, right? How do you compress this? In the sense, how do you increase your chance of success and not have to pivot multiple times? You may still have to pivot. It's not possible to completely prevent it. But what are some of those things that you can do to minimize the number of pivots, right? To get to that market, to hit that sweet spot sooner rather than later. Okay. So this is the question, right? How can science-based ventures mitigate this hurdle, that is minimize pivots? So we will not do the discussion, but I will share what I think one should do. The first is look before you leap. I mean, this might sound very commonsensical, but you have to do a fairly elaborate assessment of the target market and customers. That initial research, customer conversations need to happen very thoroughly and very elaborately. Again, this applies to all the firms, no doubt, but the penalty that a company like Meesho will pay if they don't do it as elaborately is not that much, right? They did that first pivot very quickly. I mean, they put something together. Probably they learned, and it could be right, they learned faster by actually putting a product out there and learning from how the customers behaved, as opposed to going and doing customer interviews. That's possible in that case, but it's not really possible here. So choose the target market and customers very carefully. So what do you have to look out for? Of course, market size, but beyond the market size, what are the substitutes? What is already out there? What are the technologies? What are the solutions that already exist, that are serving the same or similar purpose, that are solving the problem or the need of the customer? Very important to understand the substitutes that are available. and their price point, their effectiveness and their price point, right? You have to understand that. And complementers. Sometimes you may have a point product, but the customer might need a broader solution. So you must first also map out the entire landscape, right? Who are the key players? The broader ecosystem comprising the complementers as well, right? Who could complement what you have to create a stronger value for the customers, right? It's important to understand that. Is this customer segment open to technology? What is their openness to technology? What is the kind of regulatory regime that you have in this industry, right? Is it highly regulated? Is it going to throw a lot of regulatory hurdles at you? That is also something that you will need to look at. If you're looking to raise venture capital, which I would imagine a lot would, what is the VC interest in this broad market space? You know, VCs, like it or not, have that sort of herd mentality. Something is a fad, something is an in thing. Lots of investment goes into that category, right? And then there are other categories that are sunset categories. It's not exciting for the VC anymore. They've moved on, or they think it's too early, it's too premature. They're not interested in that space. So it's good to get a sense of that. Of course, you don't have to decide everything based on the VC interest in the market. You could have your own conviction, but knowing that raising venture capital might be harder in certain sectors. And you should also understand the path to the eventual user or customer of this product, right? So what is your own position or your company's position in the broader value chain, right? Where are you positioned? Are you very upstream? Are you midstream? Are you downstream? How many degrees separate you from the eventual customer, right? If you're very upstream, then you will need to do a lot of partnerships, because that's the way to reach the customer, right? The closer you are to the customer, the easier it is, because it is easier to get market feedback. The more upstream you are, there are many other players in between. There are many things that are not in your control. That is harder to do. And if you have a choice between two markets where you are more downstream in one and upstream in another, you should sort of lean towards wherever you are more downstream, closer to the customer. That's sort of the rule of the thumb. Then 2, look before you leap, do your homework. That's 1. Second, build partnerships. Right? Partnerships are very important. They're a very convenient way of pooling resources and enhancing capabilities. What partnerships do is they give you a very quick access to resources, right, that you would otherwise take a long time to build in-house, right? And research has actually shown that for science-based ventures, market-facing partnerships are especially important, okay? And they have been found to actually enhance their chance of success, and chance of success having been measured as liquidity events, right? Market-facing partnerships, as in distribution partnerships, marketing partnerships, and so on. These are found to be very, very helpful for science-based ventures. Technology partnerships are also helpful, but they take more effort, and they don't have such a direct link to the success of the firm. I mean, it could be necessary, but that's sort of what it is. And also, partnering with large companies provides another pathway for science-based ventures. There's several examples. You know, these days, if you look at the Indian startup ecosystem, you find a lot of multinational companies, technology multinational companies, that are very keen to partner with startups, right? Because larger companies, you know, they can be quite, bogged down by processes and overheads and so on. They're not as nimble, right? So they are constantly on the lookout for new ideas, new technologies, new innovations. And one way for them to do that is by partnering with startups. So today, if you look at our ecosystem, whether it is Cisco, whether it is Intel, whether it is Accenture, Microsoft, all of these companies, and many others as well, They are all looking for promising, exciting new technologies and startups to partner with. And that should, again, provide a nice pathway for you all to get to the market. So for instance, I was talking to this founder. He's founded a company called Zest IoT. Okay. His name is Amit Sukhija. What they do is they have expertise in machine vision, AI, IoT, and so on. Right now, their solution is helpful, for example, in airport operations, right? To increase the efficiency, reduce cost by 10%, and so on. And of course, they can do other things, shop floor optimization, plant monitoring, lots of other things using this technology. They have partnered with Cisco because Cisco has an interest in creating smart cities, smart airports, and so on and so forth. Now, it's a win-win because for Cisco, it gives a neat new piece that can go into their overall solution. And for Zest IoT, this is a nice pathway to get to the customer, which otherwise, as a standalone, it would be very, very difficult. Because in a lot of cases, the customers want to deal with one point of contact, right? They go to one company, one organization and say, okay, give me the entire solution. They're not interested in dealing with piece products. So that's sort of broadly the direction in which customers are heading, business customers, right? So they want entire solution. They want comprehensive solutions. Now, a startup may not be able to do all of that. So the best way to do that is to partner with some of these companies. I know Accenture does this, right? Accenture Ventures has a massive program where they partner with startups and weave those solutions together for various customers in various verticals. So this is another pathway that science-based ventures should definitely explore. And when you are exploring partnerships with any company, it could be a company that is your own size for distribution partnerships and so on, or it could be a larger company. You have to mind what we call as the 5 C's of partnerships, right? Complementarity, congruence, competence, compatibility, and chemistry. What does that mean? Complementarity, do you bring different things to the table? Do you complement each other, right? Fairly obvious stuff. Congruence is, are your goals aligned? Strategically, are you sort of marching in the same direction, right? Cisco wants to create smart cities, smart airports. I have a technology that can ease up airport operations. Yes, there's definitely congruence there, right? Competence. When you're trying to pick up a partner or forge a partnership, the thing that you want to ask is, how competent are they, right? Do you have evidence of their competence? And the other two are more around, value systems, and are you able to work with them? Do you have compatibility? Do the founders or the two partnering individuals in the two partnering companies, do they have a chemistry, good working chemistry, and so on? So this is something that's sort of fundamental to any partnership that you should pay attention to. And then finally, continuous rapid market feedback, right? The sooner you can go to the customer, the better. And it's important to be in touch with customers and potential customers. You'd be surprised. It's never too early. People are happy to talk. People are happy to give their opinion. They're very happy to share their problems, always, right? So if you give them a patient hearing, they're more than happy to say what is paining them, what is their challenge, and so on. And if you are a little upstream, it helps to talk to the customer's customer as well, right? Not just the immediate customer, but finally, who is going to be using this product or service. Helps to understand where this fits in their usage scenario, in their scheme of things. Extent possible, co-opt customers into the development process, and you can experiment with different revenue models. So broadly, if I were to sort of pull it all together, yes, it's an iterative process. Business model development takes time. You may not get it in one shot. As you pivot, your model will change. The question then is, how do you minimize this? How can you increase the chance of getting to the right model in the shortest possible time. So some things to explore are, just a very, very thorough market customer research. And I don't just mean reading up analyst reports and floating surveys, but actually having in-depth conversations with the customers, understanding the broader ecosystem, mapping out the ecosystem, getting a sense of the players, both complementers and competitors, right? All of that. Leveraging partnerships, because partnerships give you speed, right? And you're looking to get that speed. And then, of course, continuous rapid market feedback. So these are the things. What we'll now do is we will go through a few quick cases. Yeah. Any questions at this point? Anyway, you can chat, type it into the, okay, there is one question.
Yeah. You want me to read it out? Large companies do also take equity for providing R&D and other resources. What could be other instruments that startups can engage with them?
They don't always take an equity. I'm not sure. I don't know if you have had this experience and that's why you're saying this. Some of them do take an equity, but the entrepreneur always has the right of refusal, right? They cannot arm twist you into it. And also remember, sometimes if a large company makes an investment, that strategic investment actually can carry a lot of weight, right? It can help you, not just because it'll infuse some capital into the company, but the brand association. Now they have a vested interest in ensuring that you succeed, right? So if they actually make an equity investment, it's a credible commitment and it could be a very positive thing. Of course, you will have to see how much you are willing to let go in terms of stake, right? But a lot of these large companies actually work with startups without any equity investments involved. Right?
There's a related question on why Cisco is not developing the same thing by their own. So in a sense, when do you distinguish, how do you distinguish between competitors and complementarity, right?
Yeah. See, it's not that Cisco cannot develop it, right? But if you look at Cisco as a company, I mean, they do a lot of innovation in-house as well. But the dominant thought process in all large companies today is that we can't do all the innovation in-house. This is the era of open innovation, right? And there are bright ideas, great innovations outside the company, far more outside the company than we can ever do in-house. So let us tap into all these different sources of innovation and see how we can serve our customers better. So this is the dominant thought process within any large corporation today, right? So while they can, it's not a capability issues, but they don't want to develop everything on their own, right? They have their strategy. Remember, large companies have a very long planning cycle. They know what they're going to do for the next 3 to 4 years. They also have a lot of rigidity associated with that. It's not easy for them to suddenly say, okay, now I'll start developing this product. They don't have those type of things happening, knee-jerk reactions where they'll suddenly start developing a different product, right? Just because a startup is doing it. So I don't think that if you're thinking about, okay, if I talk to a large company, will they steal my idea and do it on their own? I don't think so. I mean, there is always that risk. You can't completely say that it will never happen, but it is very unlikely. Okay, it is very unlikely because they have their portfolio done. They're doing a whole set of innovations, but they're also looking for other forms of growth. Inorganic forms of growth is a part of their strategy as well. They're doing acquisitions, they're doing alliances, they are partnering with startups. These are all different ways that they are innovating. So this is one of the things that they do. Okay.
I think you can continue. We'll come back to this.
Okay. All right. So let me see. Maybe I move to the next one.
I think you can go ahead. Maybe take a few more minutes and let's do it.
All right, so Oasis Water. Okay, this is a mini case. There's a whole long case, but I'll try to sort of give you a bit and we will have some discussion around it. So Oasis Water is a company, it's a tech company, started in 2008, and it was developed by a PhD student based on his thesis at Yale, okay? So this is what he developed was an advanced water filtration system. The technology is called forward osmosis technology, as compared to what was already there in the market at that point in time, which was reverse osmosis, right? So forward osmosis was more effective than other technologies for high levels of TDS, total dissolved salts. When the levels are high, forward osmosis was a much superior technology than other technologies. So that was sort of their core innovation and value proposition, right? That we can filter waters more effectively. Now, the potential markets for Oasis when they started were these three, right? It's a generic technology, right? It's a water purification technology, treatment technology. So one was the municipal market, right? Your utilities, public utilities for your drinking water and so on. Seawater desalination. A lot of places don't have fresh water sources. So, can you provide a service to the municipal market? The second was oil and gas, right? Oil and gas, especially the fracking process. So this was around 2011, 12, let us say, once the technology was in place. Fracking had just started in the United States. This company is based in the United States, right? And fracking needed a lot of water, right? And where Oasis could come in was they could do water treatment. So once the fracking process is done, there are effluents, you treat that water and then only release it because there are regulations. Or in places where there is shortage, you also, of course, can treat the water and use it as an input, right? Because fracking is a highly water intensive process. So reuse, both treatment and reuse. The third is industrial wastewater. So beyond oil and gas, any kind of industry, power plants and so on and so forth, again, treating the water, the effluents, as well as treating them for reuse. So these were the three. Now, given what we have talked about, if you were to put yourself in the shoes of Oasis founder, what are the questions that you want to ask? I mean, you're trying to make a decision between which market to go after, right? Should I go after municipal? Should I go after ONG or industrial wastewater? This is the question in front of you. So how do you start working through this? What are the questions that you want to ask? To arrive at a decision. What are the
Any answers on the chat box?
Okay.
Time and cost of engagement, market size.
Okay.
Who can I approach directly?
Okay, market size. So let us say they are all big markets, right? $10 billion markets. All of them are the same. Okay. Time and cost of engagement. Okay. Who decides on procurement? All right. All right. What is the pattern of procurement, right? How does this happen? That's a good point. Anything else? Okay, whom can I cater to? Yes, you can cater to any of them. They are all potentially possible applications for your technology, let's say.
Quick execution.
Quick execution. Okay.
Value proposition. Yep. Presently available technology, value proposition, efficiency requirements and optimization, higher margins.
Where do you get higher margins? Okay, that's a possibility. Yeah. Anything else? Where we have less or no alternatives. Yeah. Right. What are the alternatives? What are the substitutes? What else? Competition. Yeah, similar to that. Yeah. Regulatory, very good. So what is the regulatory framework, right? Lokesh, what do we mean by acceptance of what?
Probably acceptance by the customer, is it?
Acceptance of technology, is it? I don't know.
Yeah,
Oh.
with new tech. That's what he's saying. Acceptance.
Okay, so that's good, right?
Return in
So,
terms of money. Yeah.
so what happened was, these are all very good points, right? I think we got a lot of that covered. And so a lot of this was also there in that slide where I said, look before you leap. So there's a sort of checklist you have to run through. Oasis actually went after the seawater desalination market. Okay. Now they found out after they had done a pilot and a prototype, etc., they found out that the existing technologies like reverse osmosis was far more effective, as in not far more effective, was far more cost efficient, right? And reasonably effective for that particular application. Reverse osmosis was working perfectly fine and was able to deliver clean water at a fraction of the cost. They discovered that later, right? They were hoping that they could bring their costs down to be competitive in that market. They could not. And they also realized that the municipal market was extremely cost conscious. Why? Because water is a commodity, right? Municipalities in many countries deliver water for free or close to free, right? So cost is everything. And they were not open to new technology either, this particular market. Right? They were very, very hesitant to embrace anything new. They had these age-old, installations, legacy installations, and they didn't want to disturb the apple cart. Something's working, it's working. So this company actually spent 2 years trying to address the municipal market and trying to compete with reverse osmosis and other products, only to later realize that this was not the market for them, right? So, of course, it's all perfect in hindsight, and you always have the benefit of hindsight. It's not, so it's very hard when you're in the shoes of the entrepreneur. It's not to sort of critique them in that sense, but it tells you that getting a sense of that market, that broader ecosystem, what is the regulatory framework? What is the openness to technology? What are the substitutes? How are they doing the procurement, right? In fact, in all of these markets, the procurement was through engineering procurement contracts. No, none of these markets, the customers were willing to work with Oasis. They wanted a point solution, right? ONG, industrial wastewater, everybody wanted a water management company or a water management solution for their installations. They did not want to deal with Oasis and somebody else. They wanted one, right? So it was only later that Oasis realized that we need partners, right? We need partners and we need to go to this market through partners. So that is how 2 years later, they eliminated municipal as a viable market. And then they sort of were looking at ONG versus industrial wastewater, right? And again, here, the regulatory piece played a major role. With ONG, the challenge was that it was probably easier for ONG companies to just dump the effluents into those wells where they dump, as opposed to incur cost to treat the water. So again, a lot depended on which way the regulations would move. So if the regulations would make it compulsory, then Oasis had a play. But if regulations didn't make it compulsory for ONG companies to treat their effluent, then they had no play. So this also is an important angle, right? So they took about 5-6 years to actually figure out that they want to play in ONG/industrial wastewater, right? So that's sort of the story of Oasis. I mean, they're still around. I think recently they were acquired, etc. But it is just to give you a sense of that whole process, right? Where you have a technology, you have multiple markets. How do you narrow it down? And what questions do you need to ask? What is that process? So that you can compress this process of finding a market. Let's quickly move to another one. Everybody knows about this company, Segway, right? It was launched with a great deal of fanfare around 2001. It cost about $5,000. Great piece of technology, very exciting piece of technology. But by 2007, they had only met 1% of their sales target. Okay, and in 2015, the company was acquired by its Chinese rival. So what happened? Let's just quickly reflect on what went wrong. Maybe what went wrong first, and then we'll talk about what they could have done differently, perhaps. Cost, yeah, very high, priced very high, right? $5,000. Why do you say it's too much? Because it's a good piece of technology, right, Sandeep? Why do you say it's too much? Application versus cost, okay? Not sure I fully understand, but okay. Safety issues, regulatory issues, yeah. Safety issues, people on Segway, nobody knew, should they wear a helmet, should they not wear a helmet, right? There were no safety framework that had been developed around it. Yeah, a two-wheeler costs close to, even a used car, for instance, to take US, used car costs much less. Yeah, it's a luxury. Timing of launch could be, yeah, you could buy a bicycle car for much lesser cost. Yeah, people didn't probably need it as a personal transporter. Fair enough. No supporting ecosystem. Exactly. Where do you park? Where is the infrastructure? Right? People didn't know what to do when these, whatever the few early adopters of Segway, when they started riding the Segway on the streets of New York, the policemen didn't know what to do with them. Where should they go? Should they go in the bike lane? Should they go somewhere else? The whole infrastructure was unprepared. Nobody knew what to do with them, what rules they should play by. Okay, charging infrastructure. Yeah, again, the infrastructure, the ecosystem piece, right? So that this was not thought through, right? It was targeted as a personal transporter, right? For people to commute to work, for people to go to shopping. That is what the positioning was, and it did not work. Yeah, insurance for damage. Yeah, what was the insurance around it? Yeah, was there really a need? Did they do a need analysis? Would people really buy this to commute, to go to shop? What was going on? Okay, so I think we have enough there, right? What could they have done differently? Could they have done anything differently? I mean, for us, it's nice to critique in the looking back, but in that time, what could they have done? Customer survey, deeper market research. Yeah, other targets, amusement centers. Yeah, so definitely they could have done a better job in terms of identifying the customer segment, which they did much later, right? They first launched this as a personal vehicle, but later on they realized that it could be used for mall security, airport security, those for tourism, for tourist locations. So those things started to come in later. What else could they have done? Come in and great. Okay, have a form factor that was similar to, yeah, sure. So the design was an issue. Yes, design could have been different. Yeah, partnerships where it is easy to install in private ecosystems. Absolutely. So if you're in an ecosystem where these are controlled, like an airport, like a mall, it's easier to implement something like this. Warehouse, yes. What could they have done to mitigate the fact that it had a huge price tag?
Rentals.
Rentals, yeah. They could have also played around with the revenue model, right? The rental, leasing, all of those things.
Yeah.
And by the way, some funny things happened around the Segway. I think some of you might know that George Bush fell off a Segway, right? And this was at a time when they claimed that it is impossible to fall off a Segway. It's a self-balancing vehicle. I mean, it was as much a joke on George Bush as it was on Segway, but it happened, okay? And that didn't help Segway's cause in any way, right? Because it's a dangerous piece of equipment now, so that also didn't help. Okay, all right. So let us move on to another example closer to home, okay? Minion Labs. This is a company based in Bangalore, recently launched by a guy called Gokul Srinivas and a few others. So what Minion does is it monitors and analyzes energy consumption of multiple devices, right? And promises 30% savings, predictive maintenance, and asset health monitoring. That's what they claim to do. So what you do is, it's a gadget, it's a piece of equipment that you need to plug into the main circuit, right? So wherever all of the junction boxes, you sort of put it there, and it's an intelligent device that will figure out what are the different gadgets, what are the different devices connected in this electrical network, which device is taking how much, consuming how much power, and then sort of learns on the go, and then analyzes and tells you how to manage, right? Predictive maintenance, to tell people that, okay, this one is drawing so much power, maybe it needs to be serviced, and so on. So they promise this. So for Minion, it was not difficult to figure out, the application was fairly straightforward, right? Any physical space with multiple devices. So any large, medium company that had a large, office building, hospital, mall, all of these were potential customers for them. So customer acquisition was not a problem. Now, if let's say you are Minion, how would you design the revenue model? What could you do? One-time license. Okay, so I'll cost per installation. Okay, good. So that's what they did first. They said, okay, here is the gadget. You buy it, you install it. Okay, Lakshmi, hold on to that thought. I'll come. Just hold on the chat windows for now, right? They said, we'll install this. You pay upfront. Okay, that was their first model, revenue-wise. But it was priced very high and customers weren't sure. They said, I don't know what you're going to deliver. I'm not comfortable paying all of this money upfront. It's a lot of commitment for me. And I don't know if this is going to be worth it. So there were some pushback on that. Okay. Then the next round, what they did was exactly what one of you suggested. Lakshmi, I think, said, share a percentage of savings. Right? So they say that, okay, I'm going to save you 30%. Now give me a cut in whatever it is that you save. But that also ran into some issues. Any guesses why? What happened? Yeah, baselining stuff.
Baseline stuff.
Yeah, I mean, what is the incentive for the customer to be honest? How do you know that, they are telling you the right numbers when they are saying, what if they say, no, we didn't save any money, right? So that was an issue. And there was a second piece to that as well, which is, of course, initially you will realize a lot of cost savings, right? Because the whole system is inefficient. But year on year, how much can you save? Maybe not that much. So the curve is going to sort of flatten out, right? Which means your revenues are going to go down. So how do you counter that? Okay, let's see. Freemium model can help. So I need a little more explanation on what you mean by a freemium model here. Okay. So what they ended up doing was actually a subscription model. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, free trials for a month and then charge. That's what you mean by a freemium model. Fair enough. They could do that. Yeah. So what they ended up doing was a subscription model where they charged, I think some 1,000 something per device per month, right? So it depends on how many devices you have, and you write out a 2-year contract, right? And of course, when you have a contract, you can have all those different clauses, that the promise of so much cost savings and so on. But that the subscription model, at the end of 2 years, the equipment would go to the customer. So something like that, which means the customer didn't have to spend all the money up front, and it was staggered over 2 years. So eventually they have multiple models, right? It's not just one. They have a subscription model, but they also have a one-time payment model where you buy the equipment. And I think, as one of you mentioned correctly, a model where they pay for the analytics, right? Maintenance, ongoing maintenance, right? So to just the upkeep and so on. Subscription for analytics. And so they've sort of bundled it. Again, here, this was a process, right? It's not that they arrived at this right at the get-go. They experimented with multiple revenue models and finally arrived at it. Again, that is the revenue part of it, but nevertheless, that aspect of the business model also evolves, right? And eventually you could have a model where you have multiple ways of realizing revenue, multiple ways of appropriating that value. Okay, so these were sort of the 3 examples that I wanted to discuss with you all. And that brings us to I think we are out on time, aren't we? Yeah. So let me quickly summarize what we have talked about today. Business models, as I said, represent the organizational and financial architecture of the firm. Firms may have multiple business models. They do have multiple business models many times, sometimes even for the same product and service. You know about the business model canvas and how it's a helpful tool, right? It is an iterative process. The development of a business model is iterative process, often taking many years, but the goal is to reduce that time, right? To compress it and to arrive at the business model as quickly as possible, right? Especially for science-based ventures, it is time-taking, it is resource-intensive. Few things that you can do to expedite this process is extensive market research, partnerships, especially market-facing partnerships, and frequent customer feedback and interaction. They can mitigate the risk. It will not eliminate it, of course not, but it can definitely mitigate it. So that's, I'll stop here. Since we are out on time, Premnath, how do you want to do this? I'm happy to take questions, but I think people may be tired at this point.
No, I think this is good. We'll probably, if you don't mind, we'll just take just a few questions if there are any burning questions, and then we can close. But sure. I think your examples covered a lot of ground, so this will be so any last few questions, please, if anybody wants to bring them up, we can take them up, please.
Yeah, please
raise your hand also if you want to. We'll unmute you. Any questions here which people want to ask? There's something here. Just 1 minute.
What were the responses of customers for Minions? Okay. Minion is doing quite well. I think they raised another round of funding, etc. Of course, I don't know their revenue numbers and so on. It's a privately held company, difficult to get that. But they seem to be doing well. You can look them up, actually. They are doing quite well.
Would you think, just a related question there, when they were sort of looking at pricing it on a per device basis, the customers will automatically want to use it only for the most power consuming devices, right? Would they sort of direct the business in that direction? Is it so? Or would they go and use it for every other device?
Well, I think they have both types happening. I think, like I said, there are some customers who buy out the box, right? So these are guys who can actually afford it. Yes, I think what Gokul was saying was initially they had this, people will be frugal about it because it's a per device thing. Okay, let us only monitor a few, right? But then the whole proposition is that you don't know which one is leaking power or which one is taking excess power, which one is being inefficient, right? So by only choosing a subset, you may be actually losing out on opportunities to make it more efficient. But having said that, I think what they do is they go with what the customer wants and you establish proof points, right? Like if you're able to show them that, yes, look, we cut down your costs by so much, they would be probably, if that whatever they pay for the device per month is offset by what they save, then they'll be more willing to actually expand that to their entire device network. So I think that's how they have gone about it. And what has also happened is once the company is established, word gets around, right? So there is a higher level of confidence among customers as they approach Minion and as they go into business with them. So that also happens there's
also a question on Meesho and how did they create an entry barrier for competition? And do you want to comment on that?
So Meesho right now is in a place where they don't have a lot of competition. I mean, they were really the sort of category creators in the space, the social commerce space in India, bridging suppliers and retail, small retailers. Of course, now they'll have to create those moats so that they can create those entry barriers. And the way they are doing it is constantly innovating, making it more, creating more value for their customers. And in this case, it's a two-sided platform. So they have two sets of customers, right? They have the retailers on one side. And for the retailers, they have to create, if they can provide them a supply platform, which is extensive, where these guys have access to a wide variety of, categories of, whatever it is that they want to sell, expand into multiple categories, right? As entrepreneurs, they want to sell as much as they want to sell, right? They're moving from fashion to home decor and to other things. So they're increasing their supplier base, thereby adding value to the entrepreneurs. And for the suppliers, it's about, a new channel, right? Meesho is a new channel for the suppliers to get more business. So they are also, what they're doing is they're helping the entrepreneurs do better. They're helping them market better, sell more, so that the suppliers are also sort of getting the up of all of that. So they are trying to do both of that. We'll have to wait and watch. I mean, right now they sort of are ahead by quite a mile because there's really nobody on the horizon, but I'm sure somebody will come up, right? And so, of course, their competition is right now all of these WhatsApp businesses, right? A lot of things happen in that manner. And also, one of the things that happen in these platforms is once you connect the two sides, they can always bypass you, right? So if an entrepreneur wants to directly deal with a supplier, they can do that. going forward. So you have to anyway keep adding value, which will ensure that they find more value going through the platform than by bypassing it. So it's an ongoing thing. It never ends, right? You have to keep creating additional value so that you become that pipe through which the commerce happens.
Yeah. By the way, we had a startup which was in the hyperlocal space. They first pivoted. Of course, edge was a big problem, big issue in terms of how do you build an edge in a crowded space, and of course all the similar kind of issues. They pivoted to first looking at serving a narrower customer segment like Misho did, but that was the case of clinics actually. Okay. And then furthermore, they in fact pivoted even more. Sujata had left a message on the chat box. They went further to actually build devices which allow screening, but they use similar kind of software backbone to do, diagnostic screening.
Okay.
And interesting switches, but anyway, they're doing well right now. Another question here: during the planning process of an FMCG product launch, what factors should one look into when choosing the city where we wish to launch? Well, very different question, but
yeah, maybe Saurabh, if you don't mind, I can connect offline with you on that. I think.
Yeah. Can we switch from cost-based pricing to value-based pricing later? Will that affect the customer choice?
Yes, it will, right? I mean, this is basically your positioning as a company. Are you positioning based on cost? Are you positioning based on your differentiation? Right? So there could be customers who are extremely cost conscious versus those who are willing to pay a premium for value. So yes, it will. So it's not easy to switch, because when you switch like that, a lot of your internal workings of the organization will have to also change. You can switch. There's nothing that stops you, but the same mantra will not work. The same recipe will not work. Right? Because if it's value-based pricing, if it's premium pricing, then there is a different way in which, that's what we talked about, right, in the business model, how you engage with the customers, what kind of support you provide, what kind of relationship you build with them. In fact, even the product itself, how do you package it, how do you deliver it, how do you help install it, whatever that might be in that particular context, everything is going to change, and you'll have to rethink that, right? If the profile of your customer changes, then you'll have to work through all the other elements to see what else needs to change.
Yeah. A question on science-based startups. Should they be engaged? When should they be engaging with the customer? When should they begin engaging with the customer?
As soon as possible. I think, in my view, it's never too early to engage with the customer. But I mean, Premnath, feel free to jump in if you have a slightly different view.
No, I agree entirely. You have to start engaging very early. The only difference is that you may not have all the, you may not have the working prototype, exactly. But that doesn't matter. Actually, you can still project what is going to come, or create a mock-up and still get views from customers.
Yeah, see, you can actually create a video. There's the story, right? Dropbox. We all use Dropbox today. Now, when when this guy started creating Dropbox, he didn't have a product, okay? And but then it was a fairly complex product to build. It would take at least a year, and he didn't want to invest that kind of time and effort, not knowing whether people would be interested in something like this, right? So what he did was he created what we call as a video MVP. So he created a video of how this product would work, how this envisaged product would work, right? And he took that to customers and said, look, this is how this is going to manifest. This is how it is going to look. Would you be interested? Will you write me a post-dated check, if I were to deliver? So this is how he assessed, right? He didn't have a product. He had nothing. He didn't have a line of code written up. but he went to the customers first, right? And there are any number of examples. Even right now, technology started like that. It's always customer led. You want to know who is your customer, what is their need, because it will also help you guide your product development process to a large extent.
Yeah. We'll just take the last two questions. One is more specific, which is about Oasis example. Is it a differentiator or cost reducer? I suppose the question is, did they position the product as being differentiated in performance, or was it about cost reduction?
Yeah, I mean, from what I know, they did position themselves as a differentiator. It was more to do with, we can, our technology is superior and it's more effective and so on. That was their positioning.
Yeah. So Mukta had posted a question sometime back from the YouTube channel, which was that, let's say an investor asks you, what is your business model? What is the kind of stuff that a typical entrepreneur should be answering? They they cannot probably pull out their business model canvas. No. So what should they be answering?
What is your business model? You have to focus on the 3 pillars, right? That is how I would say you should answer that, because it's about value creation. That is one element. How are you creating value? What is your unique proposition? Why should customers care? And therefore, why should investors care? Why are you suited to deliver on this, right? How are you uniquely equipped to create this value? What is it? What resources and capabilities do you have to deliver this value? And why do you think, the final thing is appropriation, why do you think the customer will pay? And if you have done experiments to actually show that the customer will pay, then that is even more helpful, right? Because you have confidence that yes, they're willing to pay. So that is how I would put it. I mean, definitely don't pull out a business model canvas. It's very much for your reference. Yeah.
Sure. Thank you very much, Srivardhini. I think this was great. We enjoyed the examples as well and the framework that you presented. Thank you so much. I think we'll close here and I'll turn it over to Mugdha and Anmol to make any administrative announcements. Yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you all, and all the best in your entrepreneurial journey. I'll probably chat up with several of you because I'm also doing a research study, but yeah, that's in a slightly different context. All the best to all of you. Bye for now.
Thank you, Shiva.
Bye, Prema.
Bye. Mugdha, anything you wanted to say?
Yeah. So the next session is on pitching and the art of storytelling. The pre-reads are up on the Google Classroom. So please go for the pre-reads before the session. Also, you have already received the material request for publicity of your startups. So please respond to that. We still have few responses to receive. So please respond to that email. Also, the survey has been launched. You would have got an email. So this is basically for the startups in the cohort. And the deadline for responding to this link is by Thursday, 6 p.m. That is 29th of June. So please do respond to the survey by 6 p.m. on 29th of July. Feedback link is already there in the chat box, and please fill up your feedback. So let us meet on Wednesday at 5 p.m.